Welcome to After Dusk with Don Piercy, where we're not afraid to talk about things that go bump in the night, with special guest co-hosts and so much more. We're bringing you the facts versus fiction and the history of it all. Remember, it's always darkest before dawn. Tune in every Wednesday at 10:30 and get your bite. Picking up where we left off on After Dusk with Don Piercy with the continuation from last week. Get your bite on. Very violent death.
And if you're a man and you see her by the river, then there's a good chance you're going to meet a bloody end.
And also, there's in the history, it states that most nature fairies are perhaps descendant of pre-Christian gods and goddesses, or are the spirits of the trees and the streams. So I think that's where people came up with the Tinkerbell type fairy. And they wanted to make it pretty because it came from the flowers and the nature. When really the truth underneath it is very dark.
Yes. Well, I mean, they lure women. So, yes, there's this romantic ideal of the fairy. And there's kind of this description of these magical beings that, and this is only modern history. This is only in the last 100 years, and Maxfield Parrish and all these other artists are painting, kind of these fantastical, beautiful landscapes with fairies and princesses and all these things. But the truth is that the fairies that appeared to humans that were beautiful were there to seduce humans and take them away to elfland or fairyland, which is another kind of, which is like an abduction of sorts, right? They take them back to this magical place that's like totally alien, and time stops, and they impregnate them, or they have them impregnate somone, and then and they use beauty and seduction to do this. Sometimes it's brute force. They just kind of show up and poof, you're against your will. And other times, especially with women, they tended to send female fairies to lure the women back to fairyland, and then there they would get impregnated and then wake up in the middle of the forest like, oh, what happened, right? With some of these faint memories, right? And then of course and in those scenarios that kind of history like accounts is in those scenarios, once that baby's born, a lot of times it just gets outright stolen. It'll just disappear because the fairies want it back, right? Or the fairies will replace it with one of their own sickly children.
The changeling, that's where that comes from.
Yeah. So like the alien abductions, right? We're dealing with beings that, for some reason, like to abduct grown humans and use them for breeding purposes, or straight out abduct babies, I guess, that they find fit, that they want, and they'll just abduct them and take them back. And then, of course, what's going on there, we don't know, right? Just like alien. We don't know why these aliens are doing that, but there seems to be this historically this very, very close meshing between the fairy and the alien of a history of abduction and some sort of biological birthing engineering going on. And so the question is why? Why would fairies need babies? Why would the aliens need babies? If they're both the same, then why do they need babies altogether?
Right. And another thing I want to cover too for our audience, you may know fairies just by the name fairies, but other names that they go by throughout the world include Fata, Fae, and Fairfolk. And that the history behind it really goes that not to rather a single origin, but based on, a collection of folk beliefs and people's experiences. But there's various folk theories and tales that include them as either being demoted angels or
Right.
demons or angels that were cast out, and that they were the fallen angels. So as we're coming out of season 2 of Gods and Goddesses, this is pulling the tail end of that into this in the retrospect of fairies. And
Right.
and some of them were notated to be deities, goddesses and gods, back then, pre-Christian pagan belief, and all the elements around it. Um, so I mean, it's in the Will o' the Wisp, like what you were talking about, that actually depicts of, and I don't think it was the Will o' the Wisp, because that actually depicts when a fairy is coming to you, kind of like how a banshee would, as a warning that you're going to be dying in like the bogs, or that's when
Right.
the tuberculosis comes in, and the birth deformities come in, and all of that. So
Well,
yeah.
what it is they send it, like, I guess for a lack of better explanation, they send this magical lights. Kind of, it often precludes them showing up.
Right.
So whatever, I guess, from the mind of the fairy, for whatever purpose that is, I guess to catch her attention or to, like, shock and awe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they will magically induce these magic lights, and then they'll show up. Sometimes it's just the lights. They send the lights, which means things, but a lot of times they show up kind of after. So a lot like
Mm-hmm.
alien abduction again, where there'll be a series of lights, and then the next thing you know, you're on this ship
Right.
being probed.
Now the ones that are like humans, they're notated that they're like regular humans that have special abilities, which
Yeah.
comes to want to think, now that we're coming off of gods and goddesses, the ones that look like humans, okay, if they
Mhm.
are from the fallen angels, they are Nephilim, okay, which means that
Right.
ties back to the Anunnaki and the Sumerians. And, the start of everything is to why they would have been around in that time. But maybe the gods and goddesses were the ones that were fairies and not just Nephilim. And maybe
Well, and
that's
that
why
could.
they had special abilities. Maybe it's something that wasn't blessed by God, but something from the dark side.
Right. Well, see, and that's a very real plausibility when you're kind of left with not a lot of information historically, and so it's a very real possibility, because
Mm-hmm.
again, the gods and goddesses and then fairies exhibit very similar magical attributes, very similar physical attributes, especially when you're talking about like the beautiful fairies, right? The ones that are more like us and often as big as, some of them could be as tall
Well,
as us,
they
right?
said that some of them are just like regular human beings with special abilities,
Right, which we're
which
going to get into, because there is a theory out there that it's actually not the reptilians that are in the guise of humans running government, but it's actually fairies
which would
in these
tie in with the, yeah,
alter their
that line.
forms, and they're used magically, which is, like true magic, which is always works a little slower to affect the changes that they want within humanity, and I guess really to finish the war with humans. You would think in the end. Right now, Earth is on a runaway train. Things don't look so
This
good. We're
world is
falling
this
apart.
world
You
is
got to
pure
imagine
chaos right now. This world is, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to
yes,
get worse. And that, for me, I believe the second coming of Christ. So, that's my own personal beliefs, and that's
right,
why, for me myself, I'm here to do God's work. You know what I'm
right,
saying? I don't want to do anything other than that.
right,
And I think, and that comes down to, people are sometimes people are like, you're covering these topics. And I said, yes, but at the same point, I'm bringing biblical references to my audience. We are bringing sources to our
right,
audience. We are bringing, this speculation so we can pick it apart for you. So
right.
more about this subject than other people out Thanks here. For tuning in to After Dusk with Dawn Piercy. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you enjoyed it, like, share, subscribe, and tune in next Wednesday for the next part in our web series at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you feel fit to buy me a cup of coffee once a month for bringing you this series, you can do so at our Anchor.fm platform under a new podcast. Until next time, keep it real.